The fluorescent light in the station made everything feel raw, as if the air itself disapproved of me. I kept my hands folded in my lap to keep them from trembling, while Derek paced a short track in front of the table, like he owned the room and the truth inside it. His mother, Constance, sat rigid across from me, lips pressed into that thin, precise line she had practiced through years of weaponized civility. Officer Halstead typed in slow, steady bursts, pausing to study me with the detached interest of a man sorting facts into evidence trays. My daughter Vera sat beyond the glass in a small children's room, her legs dangling from a chair too big for her, her stuffed rabbit pinned to her chest like a life vest. Every few seconds she glanced toward me, then away, reading the currents of adult voices the way only a watchful child can. I kept telling myself to breathe. I kept failing. Derek repeated for the third time that I was lying. He had a way of sounding concerned while tightening screws, the same performance he perfected during the divorce, and every word from his mouth drifted toward the computer, as if hunting for a permanent home in the report. Constance's gaze never blinked. She had told anyone who would listen that I would be the death of these children, and now sat in the sterile glow as if her prophecy had finally come due. When I said I would never hurt my son, my voice betrayed me with a crack, and their eyes met as though they had been waiting for it. Officer Halstead reminded me that Jonah had been missing for 3 hours. I repeated the details like a prayer. Riverside Park, a short call from my brother about our father's surgery. Vera on the monkey bars, Jonah in the toddler swing, the distance between us measured in steps you can count on a hand. When I hung up and looked back, the swing held only air. Derek called it convenient because the call had no witness. Constance added the idea that I had friends to help me lie. Parents, I had paid off a network of inventions stitched around a missing child. The accusations came so fluidly, it felt rehearsed. I understood with a quiet horror that they were more interested in building me into a villain than finding a 3-year-old who slept with a rubber dinosaur clutched in one hand. The officer asked Derek about the emergency custody petition he had filed yesterday, and Derek lit up talking about my alleged instability, my lost job, my finances, the old story he had fashioned into a cage and pushed across every surface where my name lived. He played a chopped recording where my voice said never and children, and again torn from different moments like paper pieces glued together to impersonate the truth. Constance said teachers could attest to my unfitness, and I felt the room tilt as if belief itself had weight, and I was being moved beneath it. Through the glass, Vera drew with intense stillness. The social worker guided crayons toward a page, but Vera's attention was fixed on the door on me on Derek's hands. When he gestured on the way, Constance's notebook lay open with neat columns of dates, like a quiet drumbeat. The officer pressed a document toward me and asked about neglect late pickups meals that were apparently insufficient if they arrived in paper bags with fries after a doctor's appointment ran long. I answered plainly and felt how plain truth sounds dull beside the spark of scandal. Derek told the room I was desperate for money. Constance nodded with the cruel satisfaction of a forecast fulfilled. I said my children were well cared for. I said their pediatrician would tell them so. I said I had receipts and school reports, a folder stacked with small, stubborn proofs that a home can be made with less square footage and more peace. The backward glance that carried me here started a few months earlier, when the divorce became final, and everything small in our apartment felt like a legitimate trade for quiet. We learned weekends without shouting. We learned breakfast without edge. We learned the sound of our lives without Derek's late returns and the perfume that arrived before him. When he pushed for more custody, it was less about the children and more about winning in public, and Constance began appearing like a court stenographer at pickup times, recording tardiness and loose braids and runny noses, as if compiling a medical file for heaven's gatekeepers. My lawyer told me to document my side too, So I learned to keep paper that told the soft truths that Jonah's belly laugh filled the kitchen at pancake time. That Vera tugged courage from the air, like it was an object you could hold sounding out words, while her pencil squared the world into boxes she could master. There was money to worry about, yes. There were hours to juggle and job applications to send. But inside those days were children who were not afraid. That morning at Riverside Park, Jonah shouted for the swings the way he always did, an anthem of motion, and I strapped him into the toddler seat with the high back and the bar that catches small torsos when the world arcs. Vera went for the monkey bars and crossed them with the fierce precision she reserves for tasks she picks herself. The call from my brother was quick an update on our father's surgery date shifting, and I stood 3 steps from the swing eyes on both children while my mouth managed medical reassurance. When I turned back, the swing swayed, and my body learned a new definition of silence. I do not remember learning to shout his name, but I must have because parents stood and began to search, and a woman with twins ran for the bathrooms, and a man scanned the parking lot for a dinosaur shirt. Someone called the police. I called Derek and begged him to come. And when the officers arrived, their kindness shrank under the shadow of Derek's performance. In the station, I sat beneath fluorescent disapproval, while he spun a story where I disappeared with children I had spent months knitting back into safety. I wanted to tell the officer that fear has a taste like pennies on your tongue, that the longest minutes are the ones where imagination gallops faster than facts, that no mother's first instinct is to build a defense while her child is missing. But explanations felt small on paper. Beyond the glass, Vera finally stood. She said she needed to talk to her mom. The social worker coaxed her back toward the crayons, but Vera set her rabbit on the table, squared her shoulders, and pushed open the door. Derek pasted on his gentle daddy smile and told her the adults were talking. She did not flinch. She turned to Officer Halstead and said with the clarity of a bell in cold air that her father was lying and she knew where her brother was. The air in the interrogation room went razor sharp. Derek's face drained his practiced composure, cracking for the first time, as every adult turned to stare at a 7-year-old girl standing with a stuffed rabbit clenched in one hand. Constance's mouth opened in a silent protest, her fingers twitching toward the notebook she had been guarding. Officer Halstead leaned forward slowly, as if not to startle the truth that had just entered the room. Vera's voice was quiet, but each word landed with a weight none of us could escape. She said she knew where Jonah was, and she was ready to show the officer. Derek tried to cut her off with that gentle tone that always carried an edge beneath it. He told her she was confused, that she didn't understand adult things. But Vera straightened her little shoulders, rising as if she had been preparing for this moment since the day she learned what courageous meant at our kitchen table. She set her drawing on the table and explained. Yesterday, she said Daddy had told Jonah about a special game, a hiding game. He had practiced it with him in the backyard, rewarding him with candy bars for getting it right. The instructions were simple, but rehearsed when they went to the park. Wait until Mommy wasn't looking, then run to the parking lot where Uncle Mason would be waiting in his truck. Mason would take him to the cabin by the lake, where Miss Amber would watch him until Daddy came to be the hero. The words knocked the air from my lungs. Constance sputtered that it was nonsense that a 3-year-old couldn't remember something so elaborate. But Vera's tone was steady, almost sorrowful. She said Jonah had practiced 3 times running to the fence as if it were the truck climbing in quickly. He had been proud of doing it right. Officer Halstead asked where this cabin was, and my panic surged. I had never been told the address, only that Derek had taken them fishing there once. But Vera, in her matter-of-fact way, recited the number and street. She had remembered it from social studies because it matched the founding year of our town. Constance lunged for her notebook, but the officer snatched it first. He flipped through pages filled with dates and neat, damning notes, The words I saw over his shoulder, phrases about building a case, about using her instability, made me dizzy. Derek stood abruptly, insisting it was a child's fantasy, that I must have coached her, that she was making it up. But Vera only looked at him with quiet disappointment. She told the officer she had overheard Derek and Constance talking on the phone about the plan, about how once Jonah disappeared, the judge would grant full custody because Daddy had a job and a house, and Mommy was just a poor single mother. Halstead was already calling dispatch, his voice clipped and urgent as he gave the cabin address. Derek grabbed his phone, frantically typing, but the officer confiscated it. The minutes that followed stretched like an eternity. I held onto the table edge as if it were the only solid thing in the room. Vera remained standing small and trembling, but unshaken in her resolve. Constance hissed denials. Derek barked about misunderstandings, but the walls seemed to close in on them with each second of silence. When the officer's phone finally rang, the shift in his expression told us before he spoke. They had found Jonah. A boy matching his description was at the cabin, happily eating ice cream and watching cartoons. A young woman, Amber, said Derek had asked her to babysit for the weekend, that she had no idea he was considered missing. Relief flooded me so fast my knees buckled. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered that he was okay, that my baby was safe. Derek tried one last desperate angle, claiming he only wanted to give me a break, that I was too stressed. But Halstead cut through his excuses. Why then hadn't he told anyone? Why accuse me of selling Jonah for drug money? Derek stammered, the mask slipping entirely now. And then Vera, with steady hands, offered the officer Constance's fallen notebook. She pointed him to page 47, where in her grandmother's precise handwriting, the entire plan was laid out. When Halstead read silently, his brows lifting higher with each line, I knew it was over. The arrests happened quickly. Derek shouted for his lawyer, declaring it was insane, but his wrists still clicked into handcuffs. Constance went silent, her face collapsing into disbelief, the control she had wielded for so long evaporating under the fluorescent glare. I barely noticed them being led away, because at that exact moment, Jonah burst through the station doors with chocolate ice cream smeared across his shirt, and a smile that wiped the entire nightmare into the background. He saw me and ran, and I scooped him up, breathing in the syrupy, familiar scent of my son. "Mommy, I went on adventure," he said proudly, as if the terror of the day were just another game. Vera stood close, and I pulled her into the hug too. "You saved your brother," I whispered. She shrugged, her small body trembling now that the adrenaline was gone. I just told the truth. But the truth from her lips had been sharper than any blade, and it had cut clean through the lies of men and women who thought children couldn't see. That night, after the chaos settled, and my children were asleep in their beds, I sat alone in the quiet and tried to understand the day. Derek and his mother had nearly succeeded in painting me as unfit, in tearing apart our family, in using the children as pawns in their war. But it was Vera with her crayon map and her clear eyes who dismantled the entire scheme. The strength she had shown would mark her forever. 3 months later, we were back in court. The evidence was overwhelming: Constance's notebook with months of entries, Derek's text messages with Mason arranging the plan, Amber's testimony about being misled. The judge looked Derek in the eye and told him his daughter had shown more integrity in that police station than he had in the entirety of the proceedings. Full custody was awarded to me. Derek was granted only supervised visits, 2 hours every other Sunday. The criminal charges still hung over him like an anvil waiting to fall. Outside the courthouse that day, the air felt lighter than it had in months. Jonah tugged at my hand, eager to leave, while Vera clutched her rabbit and looked far older than 8. As we walked down the courthouse steps, Derek's sister Melanie approached. She had stayed silent throughout the custody battle, torn between loyalty and conscience, but now her eyes brimmed with regret. She apologized, saying she had underestimated their mother's cruelty and never imagined Derek would go so far. Her words were quiet, almost broken, but I could only nod. Trust once cracked would take time to rebuild. Life in the months that followed was about more than legal papers or custody arrangements. It was about healing. Some nights, Jonah would crawl into my bed and ask why Daddy couldn't come to his preschool play. Other nights, Vera would wake in tears, terrified that someone might take her brother again. I would hold them both, whispering reassurances I hoped would sink deeper than fear. Our therapist reminded us that healing was not a straight path, that some days would feel like progress and others like relapses. Still slowly, the cracks in our family began to seal. I found a new job at a pediatric clinic with better hours and steadier pay. For the first time in years, we weren't scraping pennies to keep the lights on. We moved into a duplex with a small backyard. It wasn't grand, but it was ours, and it meant Jonah could chase dinosaurs in the grass while Vera practiced handstands under the sun. The retired couple next door adopted us as their honorary grandchildren, filling in a space Constance had poisoned for so long. Their warmth softened the jagged edges of what we had survived. One evening, as I tucked Vera into bed, she asked me a question that sliced through me with quiet precision. "Do you think Daddy ever really loved us?" For a moment, I stared at her, struggling for words. I told her I believed he loved her in the only way he knew how, but that sometimes people confuse winning with caring. "Your dad forgot that being a parent isn't about winning," I said softly. "It's about loving your children more than your pride." Vera turned the thought over in her young mind and finally whispered, "I feel sorry for him. He lost us, trying to keep us." Her words lingered with me long after she drifted to sleep. I thought about Derek, about the way his need to control had burned away every chance at genuine connection. He had built his world around appearances and victories, but in the end, it was his daughter's courage that exposed his weakness. Jonah barely remembered him now, and Vera chose not to attend the supervised visits, telling the coordinator she would wait until she was older. I didn't push her. Children know when they are ready, and she had earned the right to her own decisions. 6 months after the day at the park, we returned to Riverside. My stomach tightened as I buckled Jonah into the same swing, memories flashing like scars reopening. But when his giggles filled the air, some of the tension eased. Vera conquered the monkey bars with new tricks, her hair flying in the late afternoon light. My phone rang in my pocket, and for a heartbeat, panic flared. Then Vera's voice called across the playground. "Mom, it's okay. We're right here. We're not going anywhere." Those words pierced through the fear and grounded me. We were together, and we were safe. Derek had tried to weaponize my children against me to craft a narrative where I was the villain, but all he had managed to do was reveal himself. He had underestimated the strength of a child's truth and the resilience of a family held together not by power, but by love. That night, I watched my children sleep, their faces relaxed and peaceful. Vera's rabbit lay tucked under her arm. Jonah's toy dinosaur rested beside him. I thought about how far we had come from that sterile station room, from the accusations, from the edge of losing everything. What remained was simple but unshakable. My daughter had found her voice, and she would never be silenced again. Jonah had survived an ordeal he would someday hear in pieces, framed by the courage of his sister. And I had learned that truth, though fragile in the moment, can dismantle lies built over years. The worst day of our lives had carried an unexpected gift. Vera now understood the true meaning of courage, that sometimes the smallest voice in the room can break through the loudest lies. And I understood that love, when held fiercely and quietly, can withstand even the sharpest betrayals. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who might need its message. Subscribe for more stories of resilience and comment below with your own experiences of finding courage when it mattered most.